Ethan Morales had worked as a night security guard for nearly 3 years at the Briarwood storage facility, a vast complex of dimly lit concrete corridors, metallic units, and humming fluorescent lights that buzzed like a swarm of restless insects. The night shifts were long, silent, and monotonous, but they paid well and allowed him to study for his electrician certification in the downtime. Every night, he followed the same ritual: coffee at 11:30 p.m., around through units A through F, and then a quiet hour in the control room watching the CCTV monitors flicker. But on that early November night, something about the footage on Camera 7 made his blood run cold. Paragraph 2, Camera 7 covered the far corner of Building C, a blind spot that rarely saw movement except for the occasional raccoon or drifting trash bag caught by the wind. But that night, there was something standing near the door of Unit C14. It wasn't moving, just standing, a dark shape, roughly human in size, positioned as though facing the camera. Ethan blinked, leaned closer to the screen, and squinted. The figure was motionless, indistinct, as though swallowed by static. He checked the timestamp, 1:13 a.m. When he flipped to camera 8, which faced the same row from the opposite angle, there was nothing there. He brushed it off at first, assuming it was a trick of the light, maybe a smudge on the lens, or one of those odd glitches that the older cameras sometimes produced. Still, an uneasy chill crawled up his neck. Ethan decided to do a quick patrol, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting narrow tunnels through the dark corridors. The night air smelled faintly of motor oil and cold metal. His boots echoed against the concrete as he reached Building C. The door to Unit C14 looked perfectly normal, locked, undisturbed, no sign of anyone around. He exhaled, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "You're seeing things, Morales," he muttered. When Ethan returned to the control room, though, the figure was back on the monitor. This time, it was closer, standing directly in front of the camera, its shape clearer now. He could almost make out a pale face, though it flickered in and out of focus with the static. He froze, staring. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure turned its head, a slow, unnatural movement, and looked directly into the lens. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He snatched his radio, but the line hissed only with static. He looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. Only the empty corridor remained. Ethan stayed at his post until sunrise, too afraid to move, eyes glued to the flickering screens. When the morning guard arrived at 6 a.m., Ethan mentioned the glitch, leaving out the parts that would make him sound crazy. But curiosity got the better of him. As he clocked out, he decided to review the recorded footage before heading home. The timestamp for 1:13 a.m. was still there, but the tape was clean. No shadow, no figure, nothing at all, except one strange anomaly. A single frame showing his own reflection in the control room window, except he was smiling. And he hadn't smiled all night. Ethan told himself he wouldn't let the job get to him. Everyone on the night shift saw strange things now and then, reflections that didn't match up, glitches in the cameras, weird noises that the empty metal units seemed to breathe out on cold nights. But for the next few days, that moment, the figure, the smile, replayed in his head on a loop. He tried to convince himself it was fatigue, but the image of his own reflection grinning back at him stayed vivid. When he returned to the Briarwood facility that Friday night, the air felt different, thicker somehow, like the stillness before a storm. The first few hours passed without issue. The monitors flickered through their usual rhythm. Empty corridors, locked units, a moth fluttering near the ceiling light. Ethan forced himself to focus on his manual, highlighting electrical safety codes, and taking slow sips from his thermos. At 2:04 a.m., the stillness was broken by a faint metallic clink, echoing through the speakers. He checked the monitors. Nothing. The sound came again, louder this time, like someone slowly dragging their keys across a steel door. Ethan switched between cameras until he found it. Unit C14, but the door handle was trembling. Just barely. A small, rhythmic twitch, like someone testing the lock from the inside. Ethan froze. The hairs on his arms prickled as the faint sound of knocking followed. 3 dull thuds, evenly spaced. His first thought was that someone might have been accidentally locked inside, though that was almost impossible. The units were customer secured, and his log showed no late entries. Still, procedure demanded he check. He grabbed his flashlight and radio, hesitated at the threshold of Building C, then began walk the corridor leading to Unit C14 was darker than usual. One of the overhead lights flickered in a slow, nauseating pulse. Ethan's boots echoed softly against the concrete, his breath clouding faintly in the chill air. The knock stopped when he reached the door. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, from the other side, a voice that was muffled, slow, and trembling, as though someone were whispering through fabric. Ethan leaned closer, pressing his ear against the cold metal. "Hello," he said. The whisper answered, soft and cracked, like dry paper scraping against itself. He couldn't make out the words, only the tone, pleading, desperate, and he fumbled for his keys, unlocking the padlock with shaking hands. The hinges groaned as he lifted the door. Inside, his flashlight beam cut across the small, empty space, dust, cobwebs, and an old mattress left behind by some previous tenant. Nothing else. But just as he turned to leave, the radio on his hip crackled that a faint voice came through, whispering the same thing he had just heard from behind the door, except this time, it was his own voice saying it. Ethan stumbled backward, slamming the unit door shut, his chest pounding. The radio went silent. When he looked up at the camera mounted in the corner of the corridor, he saw it flicker to life, showing him standing there, breathing hard, flashlight in hand. Only, in the monitor's feed, the version of him inside the screen was smiling again. By Saturday night, Ethan's nerves were threadbare. Every hum, every flicker of light, Every echo in the empty corridors clawed at his attention. He told himself he wasn't going near Unit C-14 again, but avoidance didn't help. The memory of hearing his own voice through the radio haunted him. It replayed in his dreams, the same warped whisper, as though something deep inside that unit had learned how to imitate him. He started his shift that night with his thermos clutched tight and his eyes on the monitors, forcing himself to stay awake. He felt as though the building were watching him back. At 1:40 a.m., Ethan noticed a strange flicker in the recorded footage, a timestamp flashing from 1:13 a.m. to 1:14 a.m., then back again, looping every few seconds. He frowned, rolled his chair closer, and rewound the clip. The loop repeated, always cutting off right before the moment the camera would have shown something inside the corridor of Building C. He checked the system log. The footage had been automatically redacted by an admin override. Except Ethan was the only employee with overnight clearance, and he hadn't touched it. Curiosity overpowered fear. He dug into the old archive drive, a stack of unlabeled DVDs stored in the control room cabinet, dating back almost a decade. Most of them were blank or corrupted, filled with static and color bands. But one disc stood out. It was marked in faint black marker. Building C, November 2nd, 2015. Ethan popped it into the player, the screen hissing with static before resolving into a grainy feed of the same hallway. The camera quality was poor, washed in green tones, but after a few minutes, something began to move. At first it was just shadows, warping across the floor. Then came the footsteps. Slow, dragging, measured, echoing faintly through the speakers. A man appeared on screen, walking unsteadily down the corridor. His uniform was the same as Ethan's: security badge, flashlight, radio. He stopped in front of Unit C-14, knocked 3 times, then tilted his head as if listening. The audio spiked. A muffled voice whispered from inside, though the words were indecipherable. The man looked over his shoulder, directly at the camera. His face was pale, expression blank, eyes wide and wet like glass. Then the screen cut to black. Ethan's heart hammered as he ejected the disc. He checked the storage logs from 2015. The name of the guard on duty that night: M. Reyes. There was a short incident note. Disappeared during shift. No sign of forced entry. Case unresolved. Ethan stared at the words, chills racing up his spine. The air in the control room felt colder suddenly, the fluorescent lights humming louder than before. And then, from the hallway beyond the door, came the unmistakable sound of slow, dragging footsteps, the same rhythm he'd just heard on the tape. Ethan didn't sleep that morning. The footsteps he'd heard outside the control room had faded after a few seconds, but the silence left behind was worse. He sat motionless until the first trace of dawn seeped through the blinds. When he finally drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was sitting in the back seat, breathing softly behind him. He stopped twice to check. Nothing but the faint smell of dust and old metal. By the time he reached his apartment, the sun had risen, but the shadows in the corners of his room still looked too thick, too alive. He spent the next day digging through public records, trying to find anything about M. Reyes, the guard who had disappeared in 2015. There wasn't much. A few local news blurbs mentioned a missing employee, the police concluding that he'd simply walked off the job. But one detail stood out. Before vanishing, Reyes had filed 3 maintenance reports about unexplained noises near Building C and a possible electrical anomaly that caused power surges around the storage units. Ethan read the last line 3 times. The walls feel hollow at night. That phrase stuck with him. The walls feel hollow. That evening, he arrived at the facility early, before dusk. He told himself he was just doing his job, but deep down, he wanted answers. He took a small hammer and flashlight, heading straight for Building C. The hallway was empty, every door numbered in sequence. When he reached C-14, he crouched beside the wall and tapped lightly. Thunk. Solid. He moved a few feet to the right and tapped again. Clink. A hollow echo. There was space behind the wall, a cavity where there shouldn't be one. Ethan fetched a screwdriver from the maintenance cart and pried away part of the base paneling. Beneath it, he found something strange, a thin slit, wide enough to slide a hand through, and faintly warm air whispering out from within. It smelled like damp earth and rust. His flashlight couldn't reach far inside, but for a moment, he thought he saw a movement, a flicker of white, like a reflection retreating deeper into the dark. Then came the sound, a low creak, like a footstep taken in the void. Ethan scrambled back, heart hammering, staring at the narrow slit as it exhaled again, but he sealed the panel and backed away slowly, unable to shake the feeling that something behind that wall was listening. Back in the control room, he replayed the corridor footage in real time, eyes locked on Unit C-14. At 11:48 p.m., a faint vibration rippled across the screen, distorting the image like heat haze. Then a shape emerged, a pale hand pressing outward from inside the wall, fingers dragging down the concrete, leaving no mark. Ethan's breath hitched. The timestamp flashed, November 2nd, 2015, 1:13 a.m. The feed froze. And on the speaker, that soft whisper returned, a trembling voice calling his name. Ethan arrived for his next shift with trembling hands. The world outside Briarwood felt unreal now, the sunlight too bright, the city noise too distant, as if everything beyond those concrete walls had begun to fade. He'd told himself he would report what he'd found, but each time he picked up the phone, an inexplicable fear paralyzed him. It wasn't just dread, it was the feeling of being watched, even at home. He started hearing faint static whenever he tried to make calls, a low hum that sometimes formed into words he couldn't quite understand. That night, the air in the control room felt heavier than usual. The temperature gauge flickered between readings, 72, 65, 48, dropping with every second. Ethan could see his breath fog in front of him. Then, the monitors glitched all at once, flashing to the same corridor. Building C, Unit C-14. Except this time, the image was darker. The walls seemed stretched, warped, like they were bending inward. The camera shook slightly, and a pulse of static hissed through the speakers, rising and falling like breathing. And then, faintly, the sound of a man's voice. "Don't open it again," he froze. It was a whisper, but there was no mistaking it. That was Reyes's voice. The same man from the 2015 footage. The whisper repeated, softer this time, overlapping with static until it became a low, rhythmic hum. Ethan leaned closer to the monitor, trying to make sense of the distortion. Then, for an instant, the feed cleared. The camera now showed something impossible, a room beyond the wall of Unit C-14. The space looked too large to exist within the facility's blueprint. Wide, dark, filled with faint shapes like silhouettes standing motionless in rows that he felt pulled toward it, like gravity itself was bending. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and walked down to Building C again, the floor vibrating faintly under his boots. When he reached the slit in the wall, the warm air had grown stronger, carrying the smell of soil and something metallic, like blood. Without fully understanding why, he reached inside. His fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. He leaned closer to peer in. The static from his radio hissed to life. A whisper filled his ear. "You're already in the room." For the first time since the haunting began, Ethan couldn't tell when he was awake and when he was dreaming. He'd find himself staring into the bathroom mirror at home, certain that his reflection was breathing slightly out of sync. Once, while brushing his teeth, he turned away to spit and caught the reflection still staring straight ahead, unmoving. The longer he looked, the more it smiled. By the time he blinked, it had already corrected itself, as if mocking him for noticing. Sleep came in broken fragments, never more than an hour at a time. And every time he woke, the same thought clawed at him. "You're already in the room." When he returned to Briarwood on Monday night, the control room screens were already glowing, even though he hadn't powered them on. Every monitor showed the same view, the corridor in front of Unit C-14. No other cameras responded. The timestamp read midnight, frozen in place. On one of the screens, Ethan saw movement. His own figure sitting in the control room chair, staring back at the monitor. He turned instinctively, but the chair behind him was empty. His breath caught in his throat. He looked back, and the version of himself on the screen smiled. The image flickered. His doppelganger leaned forward until its face filled the camera, eyes pale and unblinking, grin too wide. Ethan could hear faint audio under the static, whispers layered over one another, saying his name in dozens of voices, all in his tone. He lunged for the power switch, but the monitors didn't turn off. Instead, the screens began playing fragmented clips, flashes of Building C, Reyes walking the corridor, Ethan himself entering the facility, and something else. A tall figure, black and featureless, standing between them like a shadow that didn't belong to either man. Desperate, Ethan unplugged the main power line. The lights went out, plunging the control room into darkness. Yet the monitors still glowed faintly, lit by their own sickly light. The reflection on the glass screens looked distorted, his face warping into a stretched grin, eyes hollow. And then, in that dead silence, he heard the soft buzz of the intercom. It clicked on by itself. A voice whispered, calm and measured, "Turn around." He froze, pulse hammering. The static thickened into a low hum, and slowly, against every instinct screaming inside him, Ethan turned. There, standing just beyond the doorway, was the man from the monitors, identical in every detail. Same face, same uniform, same trembling hand clutching a flashlight. Except his skin was pale as paper, and when he smiled, his teeth didn't look human. "Shift change," the double said quietly. The lights flickered violently, and when they steadied, the room was empty again. Ethan stood alone, heart pounding, breath ragged. The intercom crackled one last time, and a voice, his own, whispered through the static, "Welcome back, Morales." Tuesday morning arrived without Ethan remembering when the night had ended. He woke in his apartment still wearing his uniform, the key ring pressed against his chest like he'd fallen asleep holding it. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked midnight, its display frozen. His reflection in the television screen across the room appeared faintly, not quite matching his movements, lagging half a second behind. When he looked closer, he noticed his reflection's eyes were open wider than his own. That smile again, faint, patient, waiting. Ethan smashed the TV screen with his fist, but the image remained burned into the black glass. He tried to quit that afternoon. He called the site manager's office and left a message saying he couldn't come in anymore, that he wasn't feeling well. But an hour later, his phone buzzed with a voicemail, his own voice. "Copy that, Morales. I'll take over tonight." His blood ran cold. The tone was identical to his, but distant, flattened, like it had been recorded through static. When he checked the call log, the number listed was the facility's internal line, the one that only worked during overnight hours. By sunset, Ethan couldn't resist returning. He told himself he needed to confirm the facility was secure before walking away for good. The guardhouse door was already unlocked. Inside, the control room lights were on, the monitors glowing faintly. His coffee mug sat on the desk, still steaming. Someone had been there moments ago. Then he saw the logbook open to a new page, dated that night, signed neatly in handwriting identical to his own. E. Morales, shift start, 11 p.m. He hadn't written it. He stood frozen, staring at the signature as the intercom clicked softly to life. A faint static hiss filled the air. Then, footsteps, slow, measured, echoed down the hallway outside. He turned toward the sound, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam caught glimpses of movement between the door frames. A silhouette pacing calmly, the light glinting off a badge, his badge. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, voice cracking. "Who's there?" The figure paused mid-step. The radio on Ethan's belt crackled. His own voice answered, "You're late." Ethan ran. He tore through the corridor toward the exit, but the lights overhead strobed violently, plunging everything into rhythmic darkness. Every time the light returned, the double was closer, at the end of the hall, then halfway, then just a few feet behind. Ethan reached the front door, but it wouldn't open. The key wouldn't fit. He turned, breath ragged, and saw himself standing inches away. The double leaned close, face unreadable in the flickering light. "Shifts over," it whispered. "You can rest now." The world erupted in static, and the lights went out. The following night, everything at Briarwood seemed ordinary again. The corridors hummed with the familiar buzz of fluorescent lights. The air carried that sterile smell of concrete and cleaning solvent, and the monitors displayed perfectly stable footage. The guard on duty, Ethan Morales, arrived promptly at 11 p.m., signed in, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and began his rounds. His reflection in the control room window looked calm, collected, and perfectly aligned. To anyone watching, nothing appeared unusual. But this wasn't the same Ethan who'd walked out the night before. He moved through the hallways with precise, mechanical rhythm. Not tired, not distracted, not humanly casual. His flashlight beam swept the corners in exact, repeating arcs. He didn't hum under his breath like he used to, didn't sip his coffee mid-round. He paused at every door for exactly 5 seconds before moving on, as if counting something inaudible in the dark. When a moth fluttered into the beam of his light, he followed it with his eyes, not in curiosity, but in recognition, as though it reminded him of something long forgotten. At T1:13 a.m., he stopped in front of Unit C14. The lock was in place, untouched. The walls were sealed again, no slit, no opening. Yet the air trembled faintly around that spot, humming with a low vibration too deep to hear, but felt in the chest. The new Ethan crouched, pressed a hand to the wall, and smiled faintly. The camera above recorded everything, his stillness, his faint grin, the way his breath didn't fog in the cold air. Then he whispered, almost tenderly, "It's quiet now." Back in the control room, the monitors flickered once. A few seconds of static, and then an image appeared on camera 7. The real Ethan Morales, standing outside the facility gate in the darkness, pounding his fists against the chain link, his face pale and distorted, screaming without sound. The man in the control room watched the footage calmly, sipping his coffee. He reached forward and turned the volume dial down until the screaming vanished completely. Then he looked up, directly at the camera, and smiled wider, teeth flashing under the cold blue glow when dawn came. The new Ethan clocked out and locked the gates, leaving the facility spotless, perfectly ordered. The morning guard found the night log neat and complete, every patrol noted, every timestamp perfect. "Quiet night," the new Ethan said with a polite nod before walking to his car. But as he turned the key in the ignition, the rearview mirror trembled faintly. In the glass, his reflection blinked out of sync, and for just an instant, another face looked back. The real Ethan, eyes wide and pleading, whispering silently from somewhere behind the glass. The morning guard, Derek Lane, had been with Briarwood for almost a decade. He'd seen plenty of strange night shift behavior before: paranoia, burnout, the occasional sleep-deprived meltdown. But something about Morales's new demeanor unsettled him. It wasn't just the stillness or the blank politeness. It was how perfectly consistent the man had become. Same tone, same sentences, no wasted movement. When Derek joked that Morales should teach him how to stay so calm on the night shift, the man only replied, "Once you hear the building breathe, it gets easier." Then he smiled, eyes not quite focusing on Derek's face. That afternoon, Derek began his routine paperwork. He checked the visitor logs, a habit more than a necessity. Briarwood didn't get many nighttime visitors, and when it did, they were usually there for short storage access or maintenance. But as he flipped through the last week's entries, his pen froze midair. Every page since Tuesday night contained a single recurring signature beneath after-hours access. M. Reyes. Derek frowned. That name was familiar. He remembered the old case, the guard who vanished years ago. But the writing was fresh, ink still glossy on the page. When he compared it to Ethan's signature, the strokes were identical. Paragraph 3, he decided to check the security feed for proof. The night archives were neatly labeled and complete, just as Morales always kept them. But when Derek opened the file marked Building C, 1 to 3 a.m., the footage was wrong. Instead of showing the corridor, the screen displayed the inside of the control room. The camera was angled downward, showing Morales at the desk, except his posture was unnaturally rigid, his eyes fixed on the monitor in front of him. On the desk beside him sat the visitor log. Every few minutes, he'd reach out and write something in it, though the pen never touched the paper in real time. It was as if the writing appeared seconds after his hand moved. Derek fast-forwarded through the tape. Morales never left the chair. He didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't even blink for over 2 hours. At exactly 1:13 a.m., the image flickered, the camera jolted, like something had brushed against it. Then, for one single frame, another face appeared reflected in the monitor, a man with hollow eyes and a cracked smile. Derek paused the tape, zoomed in. The name tag on the man's uniform was visible for half a second. It read, Reyes. The image dissolved into static before Derek could process what he was seeing. That evening, when Morales arrived for his next shift, Derek stopped him at the gate. "Hey, Morales," he said carefully. "You been letting anyone in after hours?" The man smiled. "Just the ones who work here." Derek felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the logbook in Morales's hand. Another fresh page already signed, the ink still wet. M. Reyes, 11:00 p.m. When Derek looked up, Morales was gone. The gate swung slowly shut on its own, the sound echoing like a heavy breath across the concrete yard. For 3 days, the Briarwood storage facility stood silent. The daytime staff arrived each morning to find the gates already unlocked, the logbook perfectly filled out, and every camera operating with flawless precision. Yet no one ever saw Morales leave or arrive. Derek filed a report with management, but before the paperwork was processed, the nightly logs began, including a new note beside each entry. All quiet, all asleep. The handwriting was clean and confident, more like a signature of completion than a report. No one could trace who was writing it. The office smelled faintly of static, dust, and burnt coffee on the fourth night. Derek decided to stay late and confront whoever, or whatever, was keeping the facility alive. He waited in the control room after closing, watching the monitors tick past midnight. For a while, nothing happened. Then, precisely at 1:13 a.m., every screen flickered and went white. The static hummed softly, almost like breathing. From the far end of the corridor camera, a figure appeared. Uniform crisp, movements deliberate. Derek recognized Morales immediately. But as the guard walked past each unit, other figures began to step out from the walls, joining him in silent procession. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty, and their smiles familiar. Derek tried to radio for help, but the device crackled with faint whispers. Words formed through the interference. Overlapping voices, both male and female, all speaking the same phrase in unison. Shift never ends. The camera feeds blurred, showing flashes of the storage rooms melting into dark tunnels, the concrete walls bending like skin. The figures turned in unison and looked directly into the camera. Morales was at the front now, expression calm, eyes hollow. His voice came through the intercom, smooth and steady. "We're sleeping now, Derek. You should rest, too." The lights in the control room dimmed. Derek stumbled backward, tripping over the chair as the air grew thick with the scent of ozone and rust. One by one, the monitors blinked off until only one remained. Camera 7, the old corner view of Building C. The screen showed the door to Unit C-14 slowly creak open, revealing a narrow slit of darkness behind it. Something vast and endless pulsed within, breathing softly. Derek's reflection appeared on the screen, trembling. But behind him, another reflection smiled. It wore his face, only smoother, quieter. "Your turn," it whispered. When the morning staff arrived, the facility was immaculate. The control room spotless. Both Morales and Derek's name were signed neatly in the logbook, followed by a third signature that no one could explain. M. Reyes, shift complete. Every monitor displayed the same still image, a corridor empty except for faint footprints leading toward Unit C-14. Inside that unit, the walls felt warm to the touch, and if one pressed an ear against the metal, they could almost hear breathing, slow, rhythmic, like the deep sleep of something vast and waiting. The building was quiet again, and outside, in the dawn light, a new security guard arrived for his first night shift.